We pause our draft coverage to bring you the latest updates on some big names that might be on the move. Kyrie Irving, Bradley Beal, and Jerami Grant, the three stars at a crossroads with their respective teams in Miami, could be on the hunt for their next superstar. Are they a good fit? What would it take for Pat Riley to get this done? We break it all down on today's edition of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Heat Nation. It's a Monday edition of Locked On Heat, your daily podcast covering all things Miami Heat. However, you may be listening or watching on YouTube, Odyssey, or on your favorite podcast app. Thanks so much for making us your first listen every day. I'm David Ramil. With me, as always, is my co-host, Wes Goldberg. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Wes, what are the odds of Miami acquiring another superstar the next couple of days? Because that's where we seem to be at right now at this point of the season. Look, it happens every year. A couple of days before the draft, you start to hear more and more rumors. It's officially trade season, right? And it seems like Miami would likely be poised to make an acquisition of some kind. We're not quite sure to what extent. Could it be for a superstar? Could it be for another role player? Could be somewhere in between. Well, they actually used the 27th pick in the upcoming draft. In any case, we wanted to put a pause on our draft coverage. We've been continuing our Blue Notebook series. We'll be talking to Rafael Barlow later on today. He is, of course, a draft guru. He's an expert scout who's seen a lot of these players. Great conversations. Make sure you follow him on Twitter. And, of course, he is the host of the NBA Big Board as well, where he talks about a number of players. So we'll get into more about the draft and potential prospects that could fall to Miami if they wind up keeping that pick at 27. But for now, we want to get into the news or rumors, whatever you want to call them, regarding a couple of big names that might be breaking ties with their current organizations. Bradley Beal, Jerami Grant of the Detroit Pistons, Beal, of course, Washington. But we'll start today's show by talking about Kyrie Irving of the Brooklyn Nets, who is set to potentially pick up his player option on a deal worth about $39 million. But he seems to be at an impasse, according to Shams Charania of The Athletic, regarding whether or not he wants to pick up that option or explore the market. According to Charania, it looks like he might be just looking to do that. He might be looking for a new team, his, third over the last 3 seasons. So, Irving apparently looking to potentially get a long-term deal somewhere else. What do you make of the moves regarding Kyrie Irving?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you said, at an impasse about whether or not he wants to return to Brooklyn on just picking up that player option or potentially getting an extension. It sounds like either way, he probably isn't looking to go into next season as an expiring contract, right? He probably wants to either sign that extension that's up to the max with Brooklyn or find that max level extension elsewhere. And look, you can't really blame the Brooklyn Nets for not being ready, all gung-ho to give Kyrie the max extension based on the fact that he hasn't really been available for them. He has not been a reliable employee of that company. I mean, it just point blank, and you can think whatever you want about the vaccination stuff. We're not going to get into all that now, but he's been very injured, not just, outside the vaccination stuff. He's been oftentimes injured. He just 2 years ago, he just took off for almost a month just because he felt like it. And you can't rely on him. And so I don't blame them for being hesitant to be like, you know what, maybe we don't want to give you all the possible money that we can give you because you haven't exactly earned it. And by the way, we haven't accomplished anything that you set out to accomplish with Kevin Durant when you signed here 3 years ago. So I don't blame them. And I don't blame the market for maybe not being what Kyrie Irving expects it to be based on all of those things. I mean, like you said, it's been so many teams, whether it was forcing his way out of Cleveland, kind of promising Boston that he would come back and then leaving them, and then going back in Brooklyn and all the drama that's been taking place while he's been part of the Nets. I don't know what the franchise is that's going to be ready to just shell out just hand their franchise over to Kyrie the way that Brooklyn did. And we see that they didn't get the results that they wanted yet. That said, Kyrie Irving is still one of the most skilled players in the NBA. He fits a lot of point guard needs for a lot of different teams. Shams Charania is citing the Lakers, Clippers, and Knicks as teams who would be interested in Kyrie. All 3 of those teams you could probably put in the bucket of desperate, right? The Lakers certainly need another shot creator next to LeBron, need any more talent that they can have. The Knicks have been searching for a star forever, it seems like. And even the Clippers, who don't really seem like a desperate team, kind of like the Nets, have done basically diddly squat since they got Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. They've been oftentimes injured. It always helps to get another star. Their point guard position has been in flux. But the team that sort of that isn't mentioned here, but it kind of feels like, based on the context, might be a suitor, is the Miami Heat. They have a need for a ball handler like Kyrie, another shot creator like Kyrie. You want to talk about somebody who can create points in the half court. Kyrie Irving can create points in a phone booth, right? Like, he solves a lot, like on paper, a lot of the needs that the Heat might be looking for, right?
No doubt. We talked about it in a recent episode too, when it was discussed as a possibility. We heard the name being, kind of bandied about there. And yes, certainly from Miami's offensive perspective, it seems like an obvious fit. Like, there's a connection there to Jimmy Butler, former Olympians, co-teammates, whatever you want to call it. There's a history there. And yes, as a shot creator, as an offensive player, he is among the most gifted to ever play in the NBA. He is a unique player, incredible ball handler, shot creator, and a really solid scorer. Like, there's no denying that. Now it's the off the court stuff. And when I look at, his potential fit in Miami, and I look at these news, like, this is something that you've always done. Who does this leak benefit, right? Jerami are reporting that several sources have told that he's at an impasse. Who is this benefiting? Is it benefiting Kyrie? Is it?
I mean, that's straight from Kyrie. We know that. You can just look back at like the vaccination stuff that Shams was reporting on earlier in the season. Like, this is from Kyrie's camp because they're trying to get leverage on Brooklyn.
Yeah, because I'm frankly, I don't think, like you said, that there is a market for Kyrie Irving. I certainly don't think Miami is willing to pony up $35 million a year for the next 5 years.
There's a market for him, just not at the max, right? Like, you're going to look for something substantially lower than max. Yeah.
So it's kind of strange. Like, he's forcing everybody else's hands by saying, look, yes, I am interested in the Lakers, Clippers, etc. But basically, it's going to come down to whether or not Brooklyn wants to stay committed. And Brooklyn, back in May, after they were ousted for the playoffs, General Manager Sean Marks said, we're looking for guys that want to be part of something bigger than themselves, play team basketball, and be available. That goes not only for Kyrie, but everybody else here. And it's that be available, play team basketball, those two factors that certainly weigh heavily on whether or not he is a long-term fit there, because it does not seem like he is either of those things. He's not, it's not to say he's not necessarily a team basketball guy, but he was disruptive in Boston. He certainly forced his way out there, albeit after having won a championship in Cleveland. And in Brooklyn, it's just, we haven't seen the finished product. We just haven't seen it all tied together. Go ahead.
And from the X's and O's standpoint, Kyrie Irving is not a guy who is just down to play like ball movement basketball the way that the Heat tend to want to play, right? Which is a plus and a minus. On the plus side, he's one of the best isolation scorers in the NBA. And so, just do that. Like, why pass the ball a bunch of times if you could just go ahead and score? Like, there's logic to it, right? But we've also heard from people out of Brooklyn that he just goes on his own offensively and just sort of ditches plays in the middle of them. And it can get frustrating at times. And I wonder if from an X's and O's fit, like, again, first blush, it looks like he's ideally what the Heat need to fill a lot of the needs that this team has. But then you kind of think about him playing within Spoelstra's offense, and you're like, is it worth it? And it would be one thing if he was like an isolation scorer who was a reliable teammate in the way that maybe a Kevin Durant is, but he's not. And you don't even know if he's going to be there every single night. And that's the problem. It's like, okay, maybe we could just turn over our offense to Kyrie Irving, but what happens when we turn over the offense to Kyrie Irving and then Kyrie Irving isn't there anymore? Right. That's the problem. So
and then he freezes everybody else out too. I mean, can Jimmy, towards the tail end of his stint in Miami, be happy with a reduced role as Bam is looking to grow as a player? Is he going to be happy with that reduced role? I just can't see it. And then there's with Erik Spoelstra, like, he's had troublesome players in the past that he's had to coach. I mean, not the least of which is Jimmy Butler, but there's no strong connection there. There's nothing there. There's no relationship, no current relationship there with Kyrie Irving where he could kind of build off that and say, no, Kyrie's my guy. I'm his guy. We're going to make this work somehow. Yeah. It seems like too much of an X factor. Like, I like it from a fan perspective of thinking, oh man, you're adding X amount of points and ball creation. He's a fun player to watch. No doubt about that.
Oh yeah.
But just everything else about this, it just does not make any sense. He is on paper the most unheat player I've ever thought possible. This is what Dion Waiters having been on this roster. Like, there's just no part of Kyrie Irving that seems like a fit in Miami.
Yeah, I mean, the other part of it from a fan perspective is, wow, ESPN will finally talk about us now. Like, that's the other part of it. Maybe, but there is one reason why I am sort of warming up to the idea
All
of a
right, here we go.
Kyrie Irving deal, but maybe we save that for right after the break here.
All right. Well, we'll talk about that and Bradley Beal in the next segment because it looks like he might be making a decision sometime soon, finally, on what happens next in his career. But before we do that, just a reminder that BetOnline is still your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. You can find all of the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NHL playoffs, Major League Baseball, and so much more. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And betonline.net remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. And just a reminder that you can always reach us via email at lockedonheat@gmail.com or via Twitter using the hashtag AskLHeat. Be sure to please subscribe to the show and leave a review. Here we are putting a pause in our current draft coverage as we look to some of the current rumors floating around the NBA around a trio of stars that might be on the move. We spent the first segment talking a little bit about Kyrie Irving. And while we're not quite sure what his fit is, you seem to think that maybe there's a strong argument why he would be a good addition to Miami.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he's going to be a good addition, but when you discuss or when you're kind of breaking down like the cost of things, right? If it's Kyrie Irving essentially at his lowest possible value versus somebody else, Bradley Beal, Donovan Mitchell, like named superstar, Kyrie's value is so much lower than any of those guys, and that's with Beal coming off of an injury, right? Like I still think that Beal has more value in a trade market than Kyrie at this point, given all the things that we just talked about regarding Kyrie. So if you're the Heat, and all right, it's like for this other superstar that's not Kyrie Irving, and it's going to cost us Duncan Robinson, Tyler Herro, every draft pick that we have between now and 2029, and maybe even Kyle Lowry and things like that, versus Kyrie, where maybe there's some potential to hang on to basically most of your assets. Like if you're going to do a sign and trade with Kyrie Irving, I would be shocked if it cost you more than one first rounder. I would be shocked if it cost you Tyler Herro. And so if with that in mind, given the opportunity cost or just the cost of things in general, would you rather have Kyrie Irving for 25 cents versus Bradley Beal for $1? It's a little, when you kind of frame it that way, it's not a cut and dry decision, right? And if you could figure it out where you're bringing Kyrie in on a deal that makes sense for the team, and maybe there's a little bit of a Kawhi Leonard in 2019 Toronto Raptors kind of assassin vibe where you just bring him in for a year, hired gun, go out, score some points in the half court, give guys like Bam and Tyler another year of development with a little bit less pressure on them to create on offense. Jimmy Butler, you can make the most out of that window right now.
Yep.
It's easy to start talking yourself into it. And then you sort of remember all the stuff that Kyrie, all the baggage that comes with Kyrie, and you're like, maybe it's not worth it.
I find myself torn. I'll be 100% honest with you because yes, the player is a good player when he's available. No doubt about that. And you're right. As far as a transactional analysis, it would probably cost Miami less than acquiring any other superstar, assuming, again, for value, he has to be available. He has to play. He has to remain uninjured or avoid heavy injury where he can still contribute for a large portion of time. But I'm just thinking to myself, it is the risk. And I'm thinking to myself,
do you think the Heat could like mitigate those risks in the way that Brooklyn couldn't, in the way that Boston couldn't?
I don't. I'm trying to think how they've operated in years past. Every time they acquire another star like this, it's always the promise of something. For LeBron, it's, look, we know what it takes to win a championship. You want to win one, you can win one too. For Chris Bosh, it was more or less the same thing. For Shaquille O'Neal, it was, we're poised to do something great. We've got another great superstar that you can mentor in Dwayne Wade, etc. What's the appeal for Kyrie to come to Miami? We want to rehabilitate your image. You want to buy into that, and that's fine. That seems like a great selling point.
Right.
Except I don't think Kyrie gives a goddamn what anybody thinks about him.
I don't think Kyrie feels like his image needs to be rehabilitated. I think Kyrie's like, my image is the best. I've got the best image.
Yeah, I'm a superstar. I am a great
Right.
player. I am a one-time NBA champion and multi-time All-Star. I am likely a Hall of Fame player. It's too bad I wasn't one of the 75th greatest players of all time, but that's okay. That's your problem, not mine. So
Right.
to me, I don't think he would buy into what it would take to lure him to Miami, and so it seems less and less
Yeah.
likely here. I don't know. I'm curious to see how it all plays out. If Miami does pull it off, I will add the caveat that they have come to that kind of agreement. And for better or worse, they believe that he might be willing to put all that aside, to close his third eye momentarily and be open to the
Yeah.
experience here in Miami. But I mean,
The-
when Spoelstra breaks out one of those 2 hour long practices, is Kyrie going to be like, no, I'm really happy. I'm looking forward to being able to spend all my time doing this and not all the other things he
No,
likes to
you
do
look at the
off the
teams
court?
that have been tied to Kyrie in this report, the Lakers, the Clippers, and the Knicks.
Right.
And the thing that all of them have in common is that they are willing to cater to their superstars to a
Sure.
degree that even the Heat haven't been. And by the way, the Heat have catered to Jimmy Butler in a way that they never catered to LeBron, in a way that they never really even catered to D Wade. Like
Yep.
Jimmy doesn't always practice when they practice. Jimmy Butler doesn't even like warm up the way that the rest of his teammates does. Jimmy Butler warms up upstairs in the training facility. Like Jimmy Butler
Indeed.
has a lot more he has a lot more freedom than LeBron and D Wade ever have. And so I think that's a quiet thing that we don't talk about with this Heat franchise is that they have catered to the superstar as the superstar era has gotten further and further, deep in the years. But I think there's a limit to it, and that limit probably looks a lot like Kyrie Irving. That
Yeah.
said, Bradley Beal is a guy who the Wizards love. Beal has loved his time in Washington. Nobody's ever said anything bad about this guy as far as his teammates or coaches or anything. Everybody seems to love this guy. The
Yeah.
only knock against him is he's probably too loyal to a losing franchise.
I don't know where to believe that. It seems never quite had the kind of leverage that we were talking about with Kyrie to force a deal somewhere else. Like maybe if he had come in there a couple of years ago, and look, he's battled injury, he's battled some inconsistency. Like he was the leading scorer in the NBA at one point a couple of seasons ago. I get all that, and yet it just doesn't ever feel like he's been quite. And that was before his payday too. I mean, so he had options, but I don't know that he ever wanted to jeopardize the opportunity to make the kind of money that that he has made and is
Right.
poised to make by forcing a trade somewhere else. The loyalty thing, like, you know what? Loyalty is fine, but it's not in the NBA. It's not realistic. Like either the team's going to find a way to trade you if they want to move on from having you or your contract, or you want to move on from that team because they just don't give you the kind of piece that you're seeking for as a winner. Are you committed to fully winning? And he says he's fully committed to winning in Washington, but
Yeah.
you're never going to win in Washington. That's just not a franchise that has won consistently. I mean, they haven't won a championship since 1977, 78, excuse me. They're not going to be able to do it. This is the Baltimore Bullets that we're talking about. Since then, they've gone through a number of transformations.
Yeah.
I don't know.
When you hear that Bradley Beal, he's giving basically two different quotes to two different outlets on the same day.
Mm-hmm.
In one respect, he's telling other reporters, I can't remember, was it NBC Washington or something like that?
Yeah.
Where he's like, look, at the end of the day, I want to win, and I believe I think I can win in Washington. I'm paraphrasing here, but that's essentially what he tells NBC Washington. And then he tells Josh Robbins of The Athletic, I've already made up my mind, but I'm not going to tell anybody yet. And he's going to just sort of, I don't know what it is with Bradley Beal. This is not the first time he's been thought of as a trade person, and maybe some of it was just drudged up out of the fact that he's a superstar player and it just doesn't seem like the Wizards are going anywhere. And so obviously there needs to be a split because that happens with every other superstar. But even Beal he's remained with the Wizards, has said, I want to win here long term. I want to be the Michael Jordan of the Washington Wizards kind of stuff. But he also sort of flirts with nobody. He does this thing like he's just sort of flirting with no one every summer. And he's just sort of being like kind of just weird backwards talking here and there. You don't really know what he's thinking. And when he tells Robbins, I've already made my decision, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to say anything yet. I have a hard time thinking he's leaving Washington. I just think he's still just flirting with nobody. But there are people who believe
he's got his Tinder profile active, even though he's
move.
got a girlfriend he doesn't even particularly care for. That's the whole thing. It's just like
Right.
it's a strange thing where he's like, I can look elsewhere, and I've got options. Believe me, I could swipe right whenever the hell I want to. But right now, I'm really happy with this kind of mediocre girlfriend that I'm stuck with. I just don't get it. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And look, that whole talk of like, I'm not going to tell you yet. It's like, is he trying to drum up more interest? What's the point? Either you're going to force a trade or you're just going to commit. Like,
right.
Why public time for it. Like this, it was at the opening of a new basketball court. The piece by Josh Robbins on The Athletic was kind of brutal because it says that he hasn't shot up publicly since January 29th, I think, when he was injured. He had a wrist surgery, and so he's been in recovery.
Yeah.
And he had to hit the ceremonial 3-point shot to launch the basketball court, clanked it off the front of the rim, missed the second one, and finally hit the third. Some kid in the audience yells out "brick" when he misses the first one. Not great. I don't know. It just looks like
maybe they chased him out of Washington.
Yeah, maybe that was it. He's like, you know what? No, that kid is the one that forced me out of Washington. I was going to stay. I really was.
Well, I wonder, like, again, going back to the motivation of these things.
Pointless flirtations.
Well, going back to the motivation of these things, is Bradley Beal being mysterious now because he wants to see what Washington does in the offseason? Hey, like Kristaps Porzingis, that's kind of fun and interesting. What else, though? Like, what else are you going to do? What else are you going to do in the draft? What else are you going to do in free agency? Are you going to make a trade and give me another star to play with? What's going to happen here? I wonder if that's part of it. I just don't think that he's saying all this stuff just so that he can opt in. It sounds like either he's trying to create leverage for the max extension that he could possibly get, or potentially create leverage for a trade elsewhere. And with that in mind, like the teams that have been linked to Bradley Beal, first of all, the Heat have been linked to Bradley Beal for half a decade now. You know, the other teams that are just sort of out there, the Portland Trailblazers, obviously armed with a top 7 pick, want to have another star next to Dame. The Mavericks are always sort of now forcing their way into that conversation. Every time there's a star, they're going to be interested. But the Heat have to be strongly linked to Bradley Beal. And if Beal is going to demand a trade, or at least make it known through back channels that he's open to getting traded as long as it comes with that max extension to the new team, then the Heat are going to be involved. The question is whether or not the Heat should go after Bradley Beal. Is he the right kind of fit? Is he good enough to get the Heat over the hump? I think he's obviously an upgrade, but is he good enough to get this Heat team where they want to go?
That's a tough question. I guess a lot of that depends on the stability of the rest of the roster around him. Like, are they going to be able to shore up whatever they have in order to acquire Beal through free agency or through the draft or something like that? And that seems a little unlikely too. Like, what's the trio then? You would probably have to give up. I don't even know how, but you probably have to give up Kyle Lowry in a trade.
Yes.
You might have to give up Tyler Herro as well.
Yep.
So you're committed to the trio of Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, and Bradley Beal. Beal brings the scoring punch that you miss out in Herro, but at the same time, where's the floor leadership that Lowry provides? And yes, while many people criticize his playoff performance for a number of reasons, like he was still a valuable player throughout the regular season, and he had his moments in the playoffs. And now all of a sudden, there's a glaring hole at point guard that I don't know that you're going to be able to fill in any way, shape, or form.
Well, it'd be Gabe Vincent, right? It would be Gabe Vincent. And so what does that look like? It's
that's an undersized backcourt there, that's for sure.
It's Gabe, Beal, Jimmy Butler, probably PJ as long as he opts in or he comes back, and then Bam. Obviously, the Heat have faith in Gabe Vincent based on how much they played him in the playoffs and everything that went along with that. Do they have enough faith in him to be the starting point guard? Maybe if it's next to another creator like Jimmy Butler and Bradley Beal, who's gotten better as a pick and roll kind of guy in Washington. He's obviously been that point guard before for them. So yeah, maybe you say with all this shot creation and playmaking, also with Bam playing center, obviously a good playmaker at that spot. Maybe we could afford not to have a more traditional style point guard, and we kind of like Gabe's ability to space the floor. He's more willing to shoot the three than even Kyle Lowry is at this point. So maybe that's a plus. But I think to me, the bigger part of this is, all right, you're going to trade all your first rounders, Tyler Herro, Lowry, here, like all this stuff to get Bradley Beal. Is that team better than Milwaukee with Chris Middleton? Is that team better than the Celtics, who are going to come back probably even better considering how young that team is? Is that team better than whatever Brooklyn looks like, depending on the whole Kyrie situation? Like, I don't know. I don't know that Bradley Beal, we just haven't really seen him play that level of winning basketball in the playoffs. It's not to say that he can't do it. We just haven't seen it. So I don't really know how much better that team is. And now that's kind of the team, right? Like you're kind of stuck with Jimmy Butler for however much longer he could be a superstar, Bradley Beal, who's still just 28 somehow, and Bam Adebayo. Like that trio. How good is that trio?
It feels like the first year of the Big Three experiment from 2010 to 2011, where you've got Eric Dampier and an ex-player filling in, Carlos Arroyo getting some minutes here. Like, it's the fringe players that aren't stepping up or aren't capable. They just don't have the talent. They don't have the ability to really take you up to that next level. And that's when you finally get something out of Mike Miller, when you start bringing in Shane Battier instead of Ray Allen. And then all of a sudden, it's not just that you have the star talent, it's also that you've got the depth. Depth matters. You've got to have those guys, those role players step up at some point throughout the playoffs. And I'm just not sure if you want to sacrifice that depth, which has been Miami's strength over the last couple of seasons, in order to acquire the individual talent of Beal. I don't want to knock Beal. He's a great
I'm sorry.
player.
One more part. That's a really good point on the depth there too. And like you said, you signed LeBron at age 27.
Right.
You had a year to kind of rebuild that depth, but you don't really have that leash now, given how tight this window is going to be with Jimmy Butler being 32 years old. Like, you just do you really have a year to rebuild all your depth? I don't know that you do. And it's not like you're getting Ray Allen to come over the way, from a competitor, the way that everybody wanted to play with LeBron. Like, I think everybody likes Jimmy Butler and Bradley Beal, but I don't know that players are flocking to play with them either. So it would be tough. It would be really tough. And that kind of goes back to all right, if it's between Kyrie for 25 cents or Beal for all of it, like, what is the better move? Or is it a better move to just stay pat, considering the opportunity cost here, and wait for maybe a better fit to become available down the road?
Yeah, a lot of options there, but no clarity just yet. Having said that, we'll talk about another star out of the Detroit Pistons who might be on the move. That's Jerami Grant. We'll break down his fit in the next segment here on Locked On Heat. One live NBA draft show is not enough for Locked On. Every show is going live on draft night, so join us 15 minutes after our pick, if the Miami Heat wind up keeping them, here on Locked On Heat on YouTube for the immediate reaction from your local experts. Subscribe now to Locked On Heat so you know when we go live. We're here talking about some stars that might be on the move, from Kyrie Irving to Bradley Beal. And now Jerami Grant, a name that a lot of Heat fans probably aren't as familiar with. He was drafted by the Oklahoma City Thunder, had some solid time there, then spent some time with the Denver Nuggets, where he was able to thrive alongside Nikola Jokic, and then signed as a free agent with the Detroit Pistons a couple seasons ago. But the Pistons have just been a really bad franchise, obviously. Falling to the lottery last season, they drafted Cade Cunningham, and despite the addition of Cunningham, they weren't able to make a lot of noise this season either, although they did challenge Miami on occasion. No thanks to Grant, however, who did not have he didn't have like a superstar game versus Miami. He didn't kind of establish himself as that one player that Miami fans go, oh, I can't wait to have him in a Heat uniform or anything like that. But reports saying that maybe he might be on the move from Detroit and that Miami might be a potential suitor. So, I think it's a package of Duncan Robinson and maybe a couple picks at this point. Speaking of low value, I think Grant's contract is at a low value also for a number of reasons. What do you think of the Jerami Grant fit, or the news in general that he might be on the move?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the Duncan Robinson and picks, maybe. It depends on Detroit's opinion of Duncan Robinson. You can also make an argument that with Cade Cunningham there, you might want more of a veteran traditional point guard next to him to kind of show him the ropes. And maybe Kyle Lowry, would be like, that salary match is almost 1-for-1. But in general, I don't like the Jerami Grant fit. I don't like the talent there. I think he's overrated, quite frankly. I don't know that he's much of an upgrade on this roster. I just don't really see, like, I would rather have Tyler Herro starting than Jerami Grant. He's not much of a half-court shot creator. I think people look at him as sort of that prototypical wing, but he doesn't play like it. Defensively, he's not really what you want him to be. Offensively, he's not really what you want him to be either. He left Denver and went to and signed with Detroit in part because he wanted to be the number one option. To me, he's just sort of the D'Angelo Russell of wings. Yeah. It's sort of nice on paper. You can kind of get excited about it as a fan base. And then you watch it for a while and you're like, okay, is this just it? Is this all it's going to be? And more times than not, the answer is going to be yes. The other thing with Jerami Grant, too, is he also fashions himself as like a Jimmy Butler wannabe, right? Which is cool. Like, you weren't highly drafted. You're trying to get the most out of your career and your draft position. But, man, I am sick of these dudes. Like, honestly, like, I think the Heat need to actually, like, this is why I was kind of against Christian Wood, too. You just kind of have, like, these overachievers who are still several notches short of the superstar that you're really looking for. Go get a primetime athlete. Go get a primetime talent, right? That's why even names like Kyrie Irving and Bradley Beal and Donovan Mitchell, that's why those guys are exciting. To me, Jerami Grant is just another one of these, like, second-round, undrafted, kind of wannabe talented players that just isn't exactly what the Heat need. That's not the infusion of high-level athleticism and talent that this team really needs. Jerami Grant is several notches short of what the Heat need to get over the top.
Yeah, 28 years old, but you get the feeling that he's already achieved the most that he possibly can. And even
Yeah.
given what Miami's been able to prove in the past of being able to get players and harness their abilities and get them to play the very, very best, I don't know how much upside there is. In context of what we've been talking about with draft players, like there's a reason why he was a second round pick, there was a reason why he wasn't selected. And I don't know that he's made the most of what his talents could be. He's worked to get to this point. Can he take Miami to that next level? Is he the perfect complement alongside Bam and Adebayo? I don't necessarily see it either. Look, He's young, he's athletic, 6'8", 210. Like he has that explosiveness. He can finish with the rim. He shoots about 36% from 3-point range. So there is the theory of Jerami Grant, to your point, and yet the actuality of it might not be what Miami is looking for. And that just doesn't seem if they acquire Jerami Grant, it's because there's another move to acquire X superstar. Like I could see them somehow finding a way to pull off a trade for Grant if you're overhauling the roster and still acquiring Donovan Mitchell as well. Now, that's the different scenario. That's a case where you've got young talent there in Mitchell and Grant. You've got established veterans like Bam and Jimmy Butler, and somehow if you can pull it off. Like I'm not even.
Grant,
yeah, go ahead.
But to your point, like Grant isn't the answer, right? Maybe he's part of a solution, but he's not the answer. I'm with you 100% on that. And by the way, like he's not really a floor spacer. Guys leave him open the way that it's like how PJ Tucker shoots a really nice percentage, but he's not a floor spacer. People just leave him open. He doesn't stretch the defense at all. It's sort of similar with Grant. They're just going to go under on every screen because they just don't want him to drive and dunk. You know what I mean? And so, again, I don't. Maybe I was a little too harsh on Jerami Grant, but I just don't think he's the right fit. He's not the answer, to your point. I think it's a good point. He's not the answer for this.
Antoine Walker and Jason Williams in 2006. You've got Shaq. You've got prime Dwayne Wade. You can make those moves happen. And maybe that's the case. Maybe they say, you know what? Kyle Lowry's not the answer. We've got Bam. We've got Jimmy. Who do we surround those two players by? And maybe it's somebody else. Maybe it's another great point guard that's not a superstar point guard. And if that's the case, you want a high-level role player. Jerami Grant can be that, but you don't want to swing. That's not the swing for the fence a lot of Heat fans are expecting. But we'll cover any potential swings, whether they're a miss or a home run, in the next few episodes. Again, we'll be continuing our draft coverage when we talk to Rafael Barla of the NBA Big Board, so make sure you stay tuned for that. The first picks of the Ultimate NBA Mock Draft have been made already. Search now for Ultimate NBA Mock Draft to get over 50 insiders, the Odyssey sports experts, the draft experts of the Locked On NBA Big Board, including Rafael, and the 5-episode Ultimate NBA Mock Draft is underway. So make Ultimate NBA Mock Draft your second listen today. This is David Ramil signing off for now. Thanks so much for joining me, Wes.
Wrap it up, B.